Don't worry about it.
Okay. Review of regular meeting agenda. There isn't too much today, so unless there are objections, we'll move past that one as well. And so we'll go to our first discussion item, update on the municipal financial plan. With our, did you want to introduce our consultants?
I do, and I'll just also present a couple items before they get started on the PowerPoint. So we have Catherine and Ariel, they're with Burke Consulting. They're doing our municipal financial plan. So this presentation, well, rather the project is in two parts. So the first part is the background overview and their initial analysis, which you will hear tonight. They're going to come back for the second part of the project, which is tools, strategy, long range planning. So tonight is just kind of background and current status. And then when they come back, you'll see the second part of the project. The other thing is a question that I'm anticipating is a set of comparable cities that we elected to use as part of this project. We really looked at a combination of cities to begin this project. So we have cities that are in the valley as part of the comps. We have the comp cities that are what we would consider for the purposes of collective bargaining or statutory comps. Stand with some of those that we compare ourselves to based on size, population. And then we have other cities that we looked at that we traditionally look at either because the system of government is similar or we've historically looked at them to benchmark. So you'll see Snoqualmie, you'll see Gig Harbor, you'll see Sequim, which are not necessarily what we use as bargaining, but they are cities that we often benchmark ourselves to. So the initial set of comps is a little bit of combination of several different cities that we often look at. So it's not strictly cities that have exactly our size population. It's not strictly cities that are only mayor council form of government. It's a little combination of both. And so with that, I will turn it over to Catherine and Ariel.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. Can you see the presentation or would you like us to share that?
We have it up, but we'll share the screen in just a second.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
There you go.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for having us and for the introduction, Cynthia. My name is Catherine and my colleague Ariel's here as well, and we'll share this presentation. If you could go to the next slide, we have a highlight agenda for our presentation.
Scroll. Once. There you go.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we'll give going off of what Cynthia shared, we'll provide a brief overview of the project, and we'll share some city context information and the baseline financial condition that we've been looking at. And we'll share some next steps, and then if we're happy to take any questions that you might have. Could you go to the next slide? So what we're working on is a financial sustainability plan for the city. And the city wants to ensure that it can maintain the high quality services valued by the community and also undertake several infrastructure initiatives. So that's the purpose of this plan. So we were looking at the city's financial data, some research on peer cities that Cynthia mentioned. We're looking at findings from a recent facility study, and we'll look at the findings from the workload analysis that was recently finished. So we're at about the midpoint in the process, like Cynthia mentioned, where we've identified some budget trends and we reviewed information in peer cities. So over the next 2 months, we'll develop a financial forecast for the general fund and identify potential strategies to fund operating and capital needs. So we'll have a draft report by the end of October and then a final report by the end of November. Get the next slide, please. And I'll turn it to Ariel.
Thanks, Catherine. So we'll start with some context slides just on population and employment in Duval. That will set the context for some of the the budget trends that Catherine will share in a little bit. So starting with population and jobs, Duval's population has grown by about 14% from 2018 to 2024. Employment has also grown by about 260 jobs since 2018. Duval is still primarily a residential city, though, as reflected in the employment to population ratio that's shown on this slide. And that ratio is the number of jobs in Duval per resident in Duval. As Cynthia was mentioning, the peer cities that we looked at were the same ones that were used in the workload analysis. And looking at this chart, Duval has the lowest employment to population ratio among the peer cities. Next slide, please.
Next slide.
Comparing population to staffing, city staffing has also grown as Duval's population has grown. The solid line here represents the number of full-time equivalent city positions across all departments per 1,000 residents, and this has increased from 5.6 FTE in 2018 to 6.8 in 2024. And then the dotted line represents the number of police FTEs per 1,000 residents. And this has remained at about 2 from 2018 to 2024. Next slide. Thank you. Here is showing the peer cities who also have their own police department. And Duval has a similar ratio of police FTE per 1,000 residents to Monroe, Bonnie Lake, and Gig Harbor, and a similar ratio of total FTE per 1,000 residents to Monroe and Bonnie Lake.
Okay, thanks, Ariel. I'll share some information about the city's finances. So this chart is showing general fund expenditures by function over the past few years from 2018 through the 2024 budget. Public safety has consistently made up the largest share of the budget and is budgeted at $3.4 million in the current year. The city's total budget has increased by 8% annually on average from 2018 to 2023. But we know that the city had some one-time investments, including, for example, a transfer to the IT fund for IT investments, or some one-time staffing needs or service needs that may have been funded by one-time funds like the Federal Recovery Act. Next slide. And this chart is showing total general fund revenues by source over the past few years, the same period of time. Property tax has historically been the largest source of revenue, which makes sense for a primarily residential community. Property tax has grown approximately 5.7% annually on average between 2018 and 2023. Sales tax has also grown over this period by about 6.5% annually on average. Growth in the regular property tax levy is limited by statute up to 1% annually, as you know, which suggests that a high level of new construction in Duval has contributed to this higher growth in property tax. And the city also receives sales tax on new construction, so the city has really benefited from these growth-related revenues over the past few years. In the 2024 budget, transfers in that black bar at the top makes up a larger share of revenue. So the city is using Federal Recovery Act funds and funds from a strategic reserve to pay for some one-time investments. Next slide. This chart is showing the general fund revenue mix for Duval and the peer cities that we are looking at. Compared to peer cities, Duval receives a relatively high share of general fund revenue from property tax and a little bit lower share from sales tax. And the category other revenues and transfers in that light gray bar is larger for Duval in 2024, which may be making these other percentages a little bit artificially low. But next slide. And then this is showing the comparison of the property tax, the regular levy rate. So relative to peer cities, Duval's it's on the higher end of its regular property tax levy rate. Next slide. This chart, we like to see how revenues and expenditures have compared to the growth in inflation, as that really can be a driver of cost increases. So this is showing general fund revenue and expenditure growth compared to inflation over this period 2018 to 2023. Both revenues and expenditures have grown faster than inflation, but on both sides, revenues and expenditures, they include some one-time activities. For example, one-time revenues from the Federal Recovery Act that supported some one-time investments. So if we take out transfers in, general fund revenues have grown at about 6% annually on average over this period. And if we look at 2023, expenditure growth for salaries and benefits was a bit higher, so that helped push up these averages over this period of time. Next slide. Yeah, and one helpful thing to look at is the general fund ending balance, which was 3.76 million at the end of 2023, or 54% of expenditures in that year. We see that the ending fund balance has decreased some between 2019 and 2023, but it does remain well above the target amount. Next slide.
So yeah, we will also be incorporating operational as well as capital investments into our general fund forecast. On the operational side, we understand that the city is anticipating investments in additional staff, and we are planning to incorporate the findings from the Moss Adams workload analysis that is currently underway. Next slide. Next, please. And then on the capital side, we understand that the city is prioritizing these 4 capital projects: a new city hall, the public works maintenance yard, expansion of the Big Rock ball fields, and then reconstruction of 3rd Avenue.
And I'll just describe briefly some next steps. So we'll be developing a 6-year forecast for the general fund, incorporating trends from the revenues and expenditures that we've just described. And then we'll look at the impact of operational needs, such as the additional positions that are recommended in the workload analysis, and propose strategies to sustainably fund them. And we'll also look at strategies to fund the infrastructure investments that Ariel just described, and then estimate any potential impact on the general fund. So that's what we have to share, and we'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Councilmember Napoli?
Thank you. That was a great presentation. First, just I am curious if we will be provided kind of some of the data behind this presentation. I don't know if, besides just the slides, is there another report that kind of is behind the scenes of the data?
City Administrator McNabb?
We do have a report that is consistent with the slides that we will be sending out tomorrow.
Okay, great. Can I ask? That was sort of a question that I.
You can have a comment, yeah.
Okay. So one thing I noticed that I think is very important to acknowledge, and I'm curious how awareness of this situation impacts recommendation. Our city does not have a large commercial district, and in addition to having much lower revenues possibly from property tax from commercial properties, sales tax revenue that comes in from retail, commercial type businesses. There's also less demand on city services when you know, the vast majority of your city is residential. So, you know, certain city services potentially are lower when you don't have vast areas of the city that has all that infrastructure that's dedicated towards supporting the commercial areas. So when you look at comparables of how much revenue our city should have, and you look at comparables, our city is so far different and on the very, very low end. And so I'm just trying to understand how you acknowledge that and potentially adjust your expectations of what a reasonable amount of revenue is for a city of our size. Because most of that revenue demand will go on the residents that live here. We're already very, very high on property tax. And so I'm just trying to understand what is a reasonable approach.
Yeah, good question. I think as with any city working on a project like this, we really want to work together with staff and you all to think about strategies that are appropriate for the, as you described, the makeup of the city, like what strategy is really going to be successful and what is less feasible, you know, as a primarily residential city reliant on property tax. So I think there'll be a lot of discussion with city administrator about strategies that we should look into and the potential impact on residents, for example. We recently worked with a small city that is also primarily residential, and that sort of kind of limits or puts some boundaries on the ideas or like the strategies that they want to consider. So I think we'll just, you know, understanding what Duval is looks like and needs and the level of service that the community needs, I think we'll be able to think through what strategies are worth bringing forward for consideration.
Other questions? Councilmember Mercer?
Sort of a question and then a sort of a request. On the side that similar to echo the comments that, you know, appreciate the visuals and the view. I think there were some comments made in terms of talking points on the slides around transfers as well as sort of the revenue and one-time expenditures. I think it would be helpful for you to have some type of overlay on the column chart to essentially show without those one-time or without the ARPA funds, just to be able to basically be able to visualize the projections. The other was more around just the trending. This is sort of my question. And it builds a little bit on the last question in terms of the revenue streams. I'm assuming some of the ideas might include everything from, again, not to put more on the residents, but, you know, whether it is around parks districts or levy options or different things, because I think that's going to be one of the challenges that came up around our future revenue streams and just really understanding what those are, whether or not we choose to execute on them. So I'm really looking forward to sort of seeing the set of tools that are available so we can start to bake some of those in. But more, that was just for my education. I'm assuming that the options you're going to recommend are going to be a wide range of options, and then based on your comment, work within the council and the staff to sort of determine which ones are appropriate.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The administrator?
And I would add, we will by necessity be having these conversations as part of the budget discussion, because during this next biennium, we have a levy that's expiring. And so we're going to have to talk about whether or not we put that into a ballot measure and some of those choices that both are long-range strategy that will develop as a result of this project, but some more immediate decisions that have to be made during this biennial budget discussion.
Other questions? All right, Councilmember Naplan?
Yeah, you had mentioned that there was another city you'd worked with that had a more similar makeup to Duval, where it's primarily a bedroom community. I'm just curious, is it possible to add at least one comparable that would be more similar to Duval's makeup? I really do think when you look at demand on police services, you know, just general expenditures, that comparing us to a primarily, almost exclusively to cities that have a very different revenue makeup and just service demand makeup. I think that would be really helpful for me to see another city more similar.
Okay.
Other questions? And Councilmember Kufeld, I see you're online. Just let us raise your hand if you have a question. I'll give you the opportunity. All right, well, I'm not seeing any more questions, and then that was it. No more follow-up, and that was the initial, or did you have more? I just wanted to-
No, tomorrow we'll be emailing the slide deck and the report for you all to see.
Great. No, thank you for the presentation. It was a great first step. So looking forward to reading that.
Can I ask one brief question?
Yeah.
If there are, as you see the report that the city administrator mentioned, if there are other particular things you're interested in for the peer cities, if you could let her know so we can look at that early on rather than, try to answer your questions early on. If there's particular metrics or particular things you're curious about, we can do that.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks.
You. Great. Where did my exhibit right here? So next up, we have a policy update on DMC 14.08 permit processing with Director Thomas and our senior planner Troy Davis.
Thank you. So tonight we'll be talking about and introducing permit processing update, which is fun stuff. We did talk about this many months ago when we highlighted a slew of updates that our unified development regulations need. And so now we're starting to hone in onto one of those, which is our permit processing update, which is 1408 for DMC. The next slide.
I know.
So what update is being proposed? Again, mentioned that our development municipal code chapter 1408. This is permit processing, and the title is a little bit deceiving. It's not necessarily all permits that we process in the city, but it's related specifically to land use entitlement permits. So we first adopted this chapter back in 2007, and we made a couple minor amendments in 2010 and 2014. So a large section of this code is, almost, I'll stretch it out, almost 20 years old, which is quite an age for a code. Typically, we should have things more fresh and more updated. So that's kind of the status of where we're at currently. And I believe we did include a copy of our current 1408 in your packet. Next slide, please. So why now? So there's a few things that are triggering this in terms of our workload and things that we need to update. I'll start with the bottom there. Essentially, the more urgent push is coming from recent changes made by the Washington State Legislature, which respond particularly to local project review requirements as well as design review requirements. And so that's kind of what's pushing this to the forefront. There's also some additional issues that we have in this chapter, and these issues have just come up because, as we get applications in and we process them, you always discover the flaws, right? And so we've had since 2007 to figure out all the flaws that we had in this section of code. And so what we really want to do is get that addressed along with these state mandates that are coming along. We also have, some things that our permit processing chapter doesn't address that might be desirable for the city. For example, after we issue our first round of review comments on a land use application, and we get those review comments back to applicants saying, hey, these are the corrections that you need to make. please do that. There's no time limit. So, for example, an applicant could just sit there and have their open application, 2 years, 3 years, before we get anything back. And so there's just kind of nuances like that we want to get closed and addressed. So as they come up, we have a mechanism to deal with that. And then we also have some items that we want to possibly add the City Council and Planning Commission might find desirable. For example, we don't require any public noticing for design review meetings before the Planning Commission. It's not required by our code. It's something that we've tried to do as a matter of practice, but it would be probably a good idea to codify it, and Planning Commission City Council may find that a desirable thing to add to that. Another thing that we've found in there, just to kind of give you, some I'll dive a little bit into the weeds here, but I know there's much more discussion I have on this. But for example, we have permit expiration dates on certain permits and not on others, but there's some inconsistencies. So for example, subdivisions, after you get land use entitlement, they're good for 5 years. Well, site plan review applications are good for 2 years. Well, sometimes we have multifamily developments that are subdivisions that also trigger site plan review. So then when we issue approval, we've got a subdivision that's good for 5 years and there's site plan approval that's good for 2. And that's created a little bit of an issue for us. For an example, the Sunset Court, that was an example where their site plan review expired, but their subdivision for that multifamily plant was still good to go. So then we had to go back through the site plan review process. And it just consumes everybody's time and energy, and it doesn't really provide a benefit. So those are just things among a handful of things that we want to get addressed as part of this update. Next slide, please. And that's also, I'll just kind of note, that's one of the reasons why we're proposing a comprehensive update of this chapter. We're pretty much striking all the language in 1408 and rewriting it new. So this won't be a strike and delete type exercise, except to show you strike and deletes as we move through draft updates. So all the original language will be stricken. So with that said, we have mandatory components by state law that we've got to incorporate, and then we have some optional things to incorporate. And those optional things I'm gonna throw some buzzwords at you because I kind of want to plant some seeds in your brains, as we have further discussion. But in terms of what's mandatory, permit review deadlines, those are changing. So right now, by state statute, we have 120 days to issue a decision to an applicant on land use permits. Now that's 120 active days. Every time we send them notice that they need to make corrections or provide additional information, that stops the clock. So those kind of things aren't included. But in terms of days where we're actively reviewing, we have 120 days to get them a decision. And that's pretty challenging, especially with our more complex permit review types, which are type 3 that require a public hearing. Very, very hard to meet that deadline. It also requires consolidated design and permit reviews. That's something that we already do. So when we get an application and design reviews part of the processing, we do that as part of the mix. So we're already on top of that one. The next one is a limitation of 1 public meeting for design review. Right now, we could have several if we wanted to. We typically get through design review with the Planning Commission in 1 meeting, but there's been a few since I've been here that have taken 2 meetings to get through. But this is going to be a limitation. So if we get a bigger project that, hey, there's maybe more controversy or more feedback that's needed, it's going to be very, very tricky. As planning staff, as a matter of practice, we really like to make sure that we've squared things away with the applicants as much as possible before bringing it for design review, just so that when we get to design review, things are pretty buttoned up and we're not just kind of throwing a mess at the Planning Commission. But this is going to get even more solidified because we will be changing from design guidelines to design standards. And so there'll be a little bit less room in the whole scheme of things for back and forth and push back, I guess you could say. That's a separate update. And that's an update of chapter 1434, which is coming later down the pipe, but that again is going to be another major rewrite of 1434, which is again going to probably be a strike through and complete recreation of that chapter. So that's that. So what's optional as part of this? So everything that's not required by chapter, I should mention, sorry, in regards to permit review deadlines, just to kind of throw a little bit more weeds stuff out there. Current state statute requires 90 days for preliminary plat review. And again, that is super tough to meet. That is not changing. So the 90 days for permit plats will remain at that. And then I should mention for permit review deadlines, again, just to dive a little bit in the weeds, right, is we are going to be getting a broader range of due dates. Basically notices that don't require public notice, we're going to get 60 days, 65 days to review. Projects that require public notice, like our type 2s, we'll get 100 days to review. And then more complex projects that require a public hearing, like our subdivisions, will actually get 170 days. So that 120, for the site plan review portion anyway, we'll have 170, but kind of the weird thing that came out of this is that plats didn't change, so the plat will still stay at the 90 days for pre-plat. And then I'll also mention that final plat reviews will remain at 30 days as well. So that's just something to kind of think about in the back burner. So jumping back over to optional, new concepts will be introduced at our next COW. And sorry, it feels so weird saying committee of the whole. These are some of the topics that I'm kind of buzzwords that I'm putting in your ears now. One is vesting. So vesting of applications. We want to address inactive applications, like I mentioned a little bit earlier. We want to explore the topic of completing administrative review of final plans as opposed to legislative review. We want to discuss expand some of our expanded review procedures. We also wanted to talk a little bit about holding neighborhood meetings for certain permit applications. So for example, right now, like large projects, huge subdivisions, we don't require any sort of neighborhood meeting beforehand. So that might be something that the council and planning commission find desirable. Consolidated review permit types. So kind of what we want to do is simplify that. Right now we have 6 different review types. I would like to kind of consolidate that down into 4, just to simplify the process. We want to address permit expiration. Again, not all of our permits have expiration dates. So we may want to kind of look at that and say, hey, when does my approval expire? I can tell you when your approval expires for a subdivision and site plan review, but I can't tell you when your permit expires for anything else. It's just indefinite. And then talk about a little bit more about expanded public notice requirements, like I mentioned earlier, like design review, just so that we're engaging in early and continuous public participation, which is encouraged by our Washington State Advisory Board of Washington. So, next slide, please. So who's working on it? Me. It's being done in-house. This is something we can do in-house pretty easy. We're very familiar with our permit processing, and so utilizing outside consultants or other things to dive into it don't just mean more mess and more time. We're utilizing, of course, our city attorney for review and assistance in that process too. Permit processing, again, we are, like mentioned, I didn't include all of them, of course, but permit review is subject to state requirements. So there's just some things that we don't have a choice on in the matter or say. So it's really important to have that attorney review, make sure that we're following state law, as well as not getting ourselves into a situation that, could be liable. If anything, if there's an opportunity or a part in the permitting process for appeals and legal problems, it's gonna be in the land use permit processing section. So we always want to make sure that the procedures and everything are spelled out clearly, so there's no, we don't ever get ourselves in situations where we're facing liability. We may, again, that all said, we may utilize consultants later in the process. And again, that's maybe just one of the good things that certain consultants can provide us with insight is they work with many local jurisdictions. And so they see the permitting process chapters, they have that exposure. And so we might say, hey, can you put your eyes on this based on what you've seen? And, you know, can you see any loopholes? Next slide, please. So when is this update due? So the requirements in terms of permit process review timeline, those go into effect January 1st, 2025. So you might be asking, what happens if we don't, get this done by January 1st, 2025? Well, then it triggers a default to the RCWs. So regardless of whether we update it or not, we're triggered in regards to permit deadlines and specific things that have changed. So my goal is adoption by the last meeting in December. It's a lot of people, but I'm hoping we can do it. If not, first quarter of 2025, to get that done. Next slide, please. So next steps. I'm just about done finalizing the first draft of this. I just need to incorporate a few more things. Once I get that first draft finalized, I want to route it to our internal development review committee. So that includes building and public works. It's really important to get staff eyes on this because if as a department we work in a silo, that creates problems. And so we want to make sure everyone internally is at the table, get a really solid second draft issued. And then once we kind of have that solid second draft, we want to start incorporating input from planning commission and city council. Because at that point, we'll kind of have a solid draft. And that's really kind of the important point in time for you guys to really start taking a dive into this. So that being said, that is my overview for 1408. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Well, thank you for that. I'm excited to get more into it. A lot of interesting ideas in there. I guess my question would be, so you want to possibly adopt it by the last meeting in December. So looking at the next steps, what month would you anticipate planning commission, city council engagement? Maybe November?
Hopefully end of October, early November. And again, this is a very ideal. So please don't hold me to the fire. I'm trying, I really want to. But I'm right now the only planner under Laura, so my time gets taken elsewhere. But yeah, so that would be about the time you could expect us to come back.
All right. Questions, comments? Councilmember Schaefer.
What do you anticipate the total impact on staff time? It's gonna be more, I can't see it as gonna be less.
Right.
What's your opinion?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So when you see the first draft and you compare it to our existing code now, it's going to be double the length. So we're already at twice the length in terms of just the regulatory language in permit processing. So this will be more intense. It will utilize more staff time to, process permits because there'll be more nuances that we have to be aware of and follow. So its impact will be definitely consuming more staff time in terms of permit processing.
Yeah, and that follow-up question.
Yes.
And that's primarily due to the changes in state regulations. So
part of it's state, but mostly it's self-inflicted, I want to say. And that's simply just because permit processing is really nuanced. There's so many things that can occur during that process. And then there's also things I think as a city, just gauging planning commission and city council that, that you guys value, that you want to make sure is addressed in the permit processing, particularly with regards to public notification and engagement, and all those sorts of things take time, which, as staff, we're totally happy to do. You know, that's consistent with state statute and we want to do it right. Because really in terms of permit and development in the city, this is like the public engagement stage. You know what I mean? Like by the time we do construction review and building permit review, we're long past public involvement. So we really want to make sure that we've got that right. And to do that right, it just takes time.
Yeah, thanks.
Councilmember Mercer?
Yeah, this is, whether this is a question for you, Troy, or for our city administrator, in terms of the changes that we're making within the documentation and the permit processes, do those align to changes made in OpenGov in terms of our tooling or software? Because I understand there was some permitting software, so in terms of revising those updates, building in automatic notifications, is that sort of work that will be done in concert or sort of following the updates that we will then take steps to automate the tools to simplify the load on staff? I guess that was part of it, or at least streamline.
Yeah.
Some of this.
I can answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so OpenGov has helped us tremendously in terms of permit processing and tracking. It's more so a help for like building permits and other permit types. We do process some land use permits, you know, through this, but the system isn't set up per se to track and facilitate land use permit applications as effectively as I would like. And that just, it may be possible, you know, if we talk with OpenGov and say, hey, like we've got these other things, can we incorporate them into OpenGov to help us in the process? I don't understand the program enough to really give you that answer, but my guess, just based on other permitting processing softwares and other jurisdictions, that it's just hard. And that's just because planning reviews of land use applications are just so much more nuanced than, you know, a building permit or
And that's a fair response. I was kind of just looking for anything we could do to tweak it to,
yeah.
given the additional work, but I know it's very intensive, it requires a lot of expertise, you don't want to miss things, and that's not always captured.
So to follow up a little bit more on that question too, so what we try and do internally is create templates. And over the last 8 years since I've been here, we've done, I think, a pretty good job of creating templates and checklists that we just didn't have. And so that makes it a lot easier for us that we're not reinventing the wheel every time that we do something. But yeah, it's just, it's so complex, it's hard. I wish there was, you know, we could just press a button. Really help.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Simon?
Yeah, I'm just curious, how many different types of permits do we issue?
So right now we have 6 categories. The most common are type 1, type 2, and type 3 permit applications, land use applications, I should say. And within each one of those categories, of the first 3, 1, 2, and 3, which are most common, I should say, there's anywhere from, well, actually, there's typically about, I think, 10 or so different applications in each type. Type 4 and 5 and 6 application types are legislative, and so there's like usually 1 or 2 in those categories. But the bulk of those applications are in the type 1, type 2, type 3 categories. There's quite a few. And in fact, we're missing some. And so as part of this update in this chapter, I'm actually throwing in more permit application types into those first 3 categories.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
I thought we had a online permit processing capability that was recently introduced.
Yes, and so that's a little bit where we're talking about. So that what the portal does is it pretty much just provides the public a way to submit their application online. So once they submit their application online, that program has helped us build what's called a workflow. And so that workflow tracks all the steps that we do as we do them in processing that permit. But that's kind of essentially what it does, is it helps us track the workflow and the processing and the internal routing of that application. There's just so much that lives outside of that, unfortunately. But we plug it in as best we can. But it has helped. Like I can't sit here and say that it hasn't helped at all, but it's relative help has been small.
Hold on 1 second. And then any other questions or comments? All right, go ahead.
Oh, is that part of OpenGov?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
That was really good one. Anything else? All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So with that, we'll move on to Washington Collaborative Elected Leaders Institute update with myself and Councilmember Mercer. So we had, I'll kick us off unless you, I know I'm thinking, what day was that? It was, I think we're coming up on 2 weeks ago, we had a virtual session, which was interesting, and I'm glad we started with an in-person first. It would have been a little odd to start virtual, but seeing familiar faces, people we had met in person, it was great to connect in that way. I'm trying to remember, we did we mentioned before the Pro Action Cafe type exercise, but didn't they call it like the Pro Action Roll Cafe or?
Yeah.
Oh, you have your book, don't you?
Like some folks might want to take a look, but
Yeah.
kind of the exercise, but it's the World Cup.
The World Cafe. So it's a similar thing, but the focus was on, they were using another word besides stakeholders, but actors or people. So when you're looking at a problem like affordable housing, who are all the stakeholders, okay? And so it's a similar thing where you start with a round one of people, one person, I think I stayed at the virtual table this time. And you'd have a group of people come into your meeting room and talk about who else involved with affordable housing or what other groups there were. And this can be people who are advocates and could help you. These are people that could be roadblocks or obstacles. So that was the first, and then kind of going through, well, who did we miss? And every time you think there's no way we could add more to this list, a new group of people come in and you missed a whole bunch of stuff. And I think that was one of my important takeaways is, I mean, you never get it all. There's always something you miss. And then the other thing was looking at the different stakeholders and figuring out what their motivators were or what could help them become an advocate or what could help them at least, yeah, thank you, Troy. What could at least help them not be a roadblock per se. And then I'll let you jump in, what am I missing?
I mean, there was both sort of the process and then the logistics. And I think you mentioned the challenges, like one of the challenges you don't think of, I do breakout rooms a lot at work, but when you're in a physical space and you can see somebody, you can tell if one group has 5 people and one person in group has 2. It's a little more challenging in the virtual world. And so I think after the first round, there was a realization we needed to do some calibration because there would be one person with just themselves in the room and another one with 6, just to make sure that we got some balance. And so they stepped in, the facilitators, and did a little bit of, adjustment. I think as you mentioned, Amy, the realization that, people can move from with those changes, move from one role to another. So somebody who can come in and just, be against it, not in my backyard, we don't want to do this, we don't want to build this thing. And then you sort of bring them on board, which is a lot of the reason for we talk about this a lot in council, but having wide levels of engagement, because there's people you don't even think of that can ultimately, turn into an advocate. And sometimes you don't know why they're blockers. It's the simplest thing to sort of, oh, somebody never talked to me, or I didn't understand this, or I'm coming into this really against based on how it's labeled or what it's called or a prior experience. And by talking about it, you learn that there are sort of upsides or the value that it brings by pivoting the conversation. But, it's very iterative. I think we also have groups, whereas when we did this in person, we hold groups together. We had many more breakout groups. So in our topic, which I think we talked about, affordable housing, which is obviously something we've been discussing in here. There were a couple of the other cities that had the same topic, and in this particular session, they worked on it individually, so you didn't necessarily have the insights until you got to report out to you. But I think that also highlighted for us the ability that we can engage and work through. So that we mentioned that, I think, in the first brief, but beyond the practical skills and the exercising that's sort of in the book, in terms of approaches you can take to work through some of these problems, it's also to build out a network. And I know, obviously, Cynthia, you already have, and Amy, there's lots of engagements, but at a council level, or having somebody you can mount a sounding board that's not necessarily part of your immediate circle to get a different has been valuable both in terms of if you missed something or we took an approach here and we didn't think it'd work and lo and behold, it yielded these great results. I guess my last thing is like, we also didn't get through everything that we had on the agenda for these 2 days. It was a Friday, Saturday this time versus a Saturday, Sunday. I'm curious how much that's going to carry on into future sessions. The next one is in Everett. So we're local, essentially, we can drive up to it each day, but there's some initial rollover. So hopefully that effect, that snowball or building on doesn't sort of carry forward. But the intent is to build on the same, we've been building on the same artifacts to get it more closer and closer to a solution. We're still not into that solutioning piece yet. I think that's kind of where we were starting to transition in terms of how we start to identify solutions and then how to socialize those within the community. So.
And that's really hard in a room full of people who are solution creators, to not be in that part yet. It's like, no, we want you to first focus on, the contributing factors. We want you to focus on the stakeholders. And we're like, we really want to talk about how to fix it. So it's been teaching a little bit of discipline there. What was the name of the tool we used? You use it a lot, so it's like starts with an M.
Yeah, it was Mural.
Mural, thank you. That was great. I'm sure I don't know what it costs, but I'm just for the potential of hybrid. We've had exercises where if somebody's virtual, if we're doing stuff on sticky notes, they can't participate. Other than if they were to message like the clerk and then when they wrote it down for them and put it up, but that's just not the same. So that was really, I'd never used it before, so that was my first try, and it's pretty. I learned it pretty quick. I was adding a bunch of little fun things to our circle, but anyways, it's a good exercise, a good tool as well. Trying to think of what else. I think, the last thing I would say is with all of this, we're operating on the assumption, as she said this a few times in each session we've had now, that the current system does not include everybody and is broken in some capacity, right? Because if it was working great, we wouldn't be talking about it. It wouldn't be one of the problems we're bringing up. So I think sometimes, it's that idea of if it's not broke, don't fix it. Well, it is, and it's not including everyone. So who are we missing? How do we improve it? And that could go for every single problem that each of these cities brought to the table. So I'm excited for the Everett in-person one again, and I've just been really enjoying it, and it's really stretching my brain and making me think of new ways to approach problems. So.
Yeah, and the facilitators, have been really interesting as well. I mean, I'll just use one example, but a lot of one of the facilitators has sort of a background in building systems around, well, some of it was around food scarcity and other things, but really like brings real world examples in, and even in our conversations around affordable housing, we'll identify a stakeholder, but really the mechanisms in terms of how you engage or how you validate are not necessarily easy, because you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know who you don't know, and you bring in biases, and to your point, it applied to all different scenarios. The Mural tool, which we used with Zoom, they also have been acquired by Lumen Institute, and a lot of the techniques, the World Cafe and everything for around human-centered design and engagement, the tool set is part of that. So I think we'll have some work probably in council in terms of how we think about things differently, or maybe pilot or experiment with some tools, or you've already done a lot of things. I mean, even the postcard exercise in terms of how we do that for engagement, very simple concept, but it's visualized, people get to move things around, it's interactive, to maybe expand some opportunities. Mural in particular, I'm sure there's licensing and costs associated with it, and whether it scales or more broadly, but for some of the town hall type exercises, there might be a way that people that can come to the town hall and participate, and then people that might pull in some other folks virtually, an interesting way.
Yeah, did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. This sounds like a very interesting class to take. One thing I'm hearing, and I might not 100% sure understand exactly what the goals of collaborative sessions are, but I'm not sure is the goal to get people on board, and so there's like labeling people advocates and obstacles.
That's more criminal.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm like, I would not
No,
stakeholder to
yeah.
be considered an obstacle, and the goal is to get them on board. It would be,
Yeah.
in my opinion, it would be the person who might appear to be an obstacle might bring something to the table that hadn't been thought about, or there are ways to mitigate a concern that they have, so not just an idea of, well, if we just say it a certain way, if we just rephrase it, then they'll be on board, because they might provide valuable input. So I don't know,
Yeah,
I don't think they
not
can
including
get
our-
around it, but I
The goal of the whole
Great
program, it was all built around the increasing polarization in society in general, but especially around government. And so each of these exercises is really starting to pick away at those biases we all have and acknowledging them. And just because you see something as an obstacle, it's not painted in a negative way. It's like, what do we view as roadblocks, whether that's a thing, a person, whatever, right? And then what are the motivators there and how can we work with them, not just go around them? Well, like, well, they don't agree, so let's just move on and not include them, that you need to include everybody or you're just gonna keep making the problem worse and polarizing more. So it's just really built around that, trying to get at the polarization that's
And
happening.
it's more conceptual, and I forget the specifics, because each exercise is gonna be a little different. Like, it's not a labeling per se, that you're like, you're in this bucket and you're in that bucket. It's really trying to, create strategies that build engagement. I think when it comes to, and roadblock maybe isn't the right word, but things you need to work through or overcome or shift opinions. But the other reality that was raised, and we encounter this sometimes, is there occasionally there's somebody within the organization, or you have to get approval, or a homeowner or landowner who simply is intransigent. And then it brings in the timing. Like, it still might be the right project and the right design, but you're never really going to make any forward momentum until there's a shift or a change. And there were some examples given there, and then you move forward. Or so some of the things, I think it was also acknowledgement, there are things you can influence and change and try to curate relationships, build connections, share information. There will be times where you get sort of an impediment that you put the project on the shelf for a little bit because the timing isn't right, or the conditions aren't right, or funding's not available, and then you sort of revisit. It doesn't mean the problem or the challenge went away. It just means that the stars on the line in the moment. So a lot of this is very conceptual, and it would be applied uniquely in every situation. It's really just trying to get folks to think about things differently. And I think what makes this particular experience interesting is even from a city makeup and political point of view and size, it's a whole bunch of different groups. So inherently, everyone is kind of coming from different places. And I think that's been one of the refreshing things. Even when we know people have a particular point of view or a political leaning, you get into these exercises, and more often than not, that goes away, because you're talking about an end state or an objective, and you're not talking about like your stake in it. So.
Yeah, it's been great, and one of the things you said, and I'll sort of restate, is it's a group of roughly 50-something people, and we've gotten to know them well enough that I feel already, I mean, if I had something that I really just needed a set of new eyes on or a new perspective, people you could email right now and say, hey, if you have time, could you look at this? And that's been a really great resource to have, so. Yeah, any other questions or comments? We'll keep you all posted as we keep moving through it. Oh, did you have something here?
Well, yeah, I guess more of a comment than anything else. One of the things I miss in our, kind of, limited discussions, whether it because of Robert's Rules of Wars, limited because of time and other practical, measures. But a lot of the give and take isn't there, right? And I think that, on occasion that does inhibit our ability to understand where somebody's really coming from, right? Why are they for this? Why are they against this? Really, what's behind that? And that's the type of thing I think it is very important for us. So if you guys come up with some ideas on how we can do a better job of that, that would be terrific.
Yeah, I'll think about that too. All right, so with that, we're at 6:33. Would we want to take care of city administrator report or get going on it? I don't know how long it is, but.
It is not long today.
Oh, okay, so we can get it done.
We can get it done.
Yeah, Councilmember Schieffer.
I sent my comments on the park trails and open space and housing development out to probably everybody in this room and other people. And I apologize for that. I realized as soon as I did that, I made a mistake, but anyway, and then to make it worse, I think instructions were given specifically not to do that. My apologies.
Well, I believe we have some slides on that, not about that particular issue, but the process for the park trails and open space plan. Thank you for your comments, we did receive them. Next slide, and we'll start with the public works update.
Good evening, council staff, one citizen guest, and on-screen folks, Steve Laniszewski, Public Works. Mr. Schaefer, I see your mistake and I raised you an email to 147 volleyball parents. No self, I haven't read it. I'm a volleyball coach. Well, I really appreciate that, but I don't really care. So, okay, just a quick update, Jordan Field, we had budgeted to get the actual entire property mowed. They start that tomorrow, it will take about 3 days. If you haven't ever walked around, there's 10-foot high blackberries, brambles, there is some wire we know of kind of wrapped up in spots. We tried to advise the contractor of. So that's that should be nice to kind of clean the property and see what's there. We're working a lot this next month and I have the first ever deadline put out by the EPA. So Environmental Protection Agency is requiring all, it's called the lead service line inventory, but we have to identify and tableize our entire water system service list. So materials typed to the property, and then trying to also understand the year of construction that we know of, so we can limit any lead in anybody's service line. There was no lead in anything commercially after 1986, so the bulk of our known developments happened after 1986. But obviously Old Town, and we were established in 1913, and we had our water system in the 60s, so there is some older stuff in and around. So Larissa and Benny are doing the bulk of that. We're going to work with local finance to try to cross up some tables, but that's due October 16th, and we are at 3,168 connections. So it's a big spreadsheet. We are using our GIS output. The one thing our GIS output does not have is actual addresses for physical services, which is required of the table. So we're going to try to see what OpenGov has in it, and if there's anything we can tag in the OpenGov asset inventory relative to our GIS inventory that can, like, Benny can just make a little applet that can pick something out and then stitch them together. But I just learned from Angela, the OpenGov table maker for this specific use may not provide an Excel output. So it does do Excel outputs for a lot of things. So if it can't, I imagine we can ask. It will quite help us.
Yeah.
You may have noticed PSC did some work today on Main Street down my valley to formalize the repair again of those PSC lids. So they were out there. That's done. We're not quite sure yet how nefarious this is, but we are seeing some weekend and holiday sewer inflow spikes. We're reviewing the data, but it has occurred prior to like 9 a.m. on that weekend or a holiday. So yesterday, Steph and I were running around town trying to find flows. I mean, it's spiking like thousands of gallons, and you could see it was a mixed liquor, not a wastewater flow, which is kind of clear. This was from what you would expect from a construction site with a lot of runoff and mud. It was very thick consistency, like somebody dumped in a mud truck. So we're gonna start doing some review of some data, and then I'm not sure exactly how and where, but we're gonna start trying to figure that out. That's a no-no. Even though our plant can handle it, we don't want to, and that's a big fine. And when we find people or the group or the whatever it is, that'll be interesting. Striping will occur on 150th this week. For those folks who do not know, you don't stripe new asphalt when it's fresh. It's uncured, and there's a lot of oil residual on the surface, and then your striping won't stick. So you wait typically 3 weeks till it's kind of worn in a little bit and cured up. And then we are working with Waste Management, that was just last year's clip, but October 12th will be this year's weekend event. And we are adding, per the contract, we are adding an extra item there too, so we'll see what it is. We're trying to find what kind of contractor they can bring in. Typically it'll be like electronics drop off, or styrofoam, or textile, or
We're very tired.
so next slide. Third item update, so a couple quick picks. The one on the top right is looking from the east west at the culvert, which would be Third Avenue. So the stream work is done. We met the deadline required by Fish and Wildlife, and then the kind of middle left image is actually the plunge pools as you go down the creek under and in the culvert itself. It's amazing that that is, you know, was a 40-inch pipe that is now walkable. And then still on Third Avenue, we were selected through the Safe Routes to School program as, I don't know if we're a finalist yet, but we're through the next steps for our $2.5 million request, grant request on Third Avenue. So we have an interview on the 27th. And then they didn't perish, so they're not really a Darwin Award winner, but this moron did this the other morning. It was 6 a.m. They pulled off the road, and that's Darcy's in the foreground there, that picture with his massive dually work truck and his trailer with a 30,000-pound piece of equipment on it. So that took staff 8 hours to repair. They damaged all of the irrigation under there, the landscaping itself, the sprinkler heads, the pipes, all that. I mean, this guy thought it was just a regular old good old day to just whip off the shoulder and go get a coffee. And if you do know where this is, not 50 yards ahead is a pull-out parking stall adjacent to the curb. Yeah.
Councilmember Napoli?
Yeah, that reminds me, do we have a way to recoup the cost?
We try, it's difficult because there's not like there's a citation, but we searched them up. Joe got their license plate, confronted the guy at 6 in the morning. I made an invoice and contacted the contractor. So we got a knowledge.
Have we been able to do that for the guardrail?
No, guardrail we haven't. If they're not cited, and we don't have a plate. Yeah. So.
There's been a lot.
Oh, we spent a lot. Yeah, my budget for the proposal for streets was up by a good portion because that gets hit all the time. And that stuff's expensive.
Councilmember Supple?
Is there like an alternative material for the garden?
Probably a wedge curb made out of concrete. But what we don't know is how that foundation was built, the bridge development itself. So we can't just go ahead and throw a load on top of something that may not be able to support it. So go do some work when you have a chance to try to bend that as well. But yeah, we have other ideas, but yeah, the shocker, the nice thing about the road closure is it stayed clean for, months. Sure it's good already, I walked down there. Next slide. Oh, that's off center. So you've all probably seen that's just a quick snippet on the trolls. So Randy Bird, she actually graduated with my oldest, so we know the Birds really well, and Randy. So that was a pretty amazing project. They look great. Like just the relief of painting the background, because those things are mounted exactly as they were, but now they look like they're a little more three-dimensional because the color popped behind them. So the crew helped her install those. Then he had a little drone shot while they were out there. Rita was doing a little traffic control, and that was when the road was a little open because she got done last week. Yeah, so no.
And we have a press release going out on this project, and Reagan was interviewed, and it's a very whimsical piece that we're hoping some media picks up.
Yeah, very cool. Okay, next slide. And then a little bit of good news update. We are in an executed contract on the Daisy piece, so the 2 north parcels above the Big Rock ball fields for park expansion. So that's a 10-day close starting today. Another 10 acres, almost 10 acres for the park.
All right, so Director Thomas is on her way to the Planning Directors Conference in Chelan, so she included a couple slides. So first, park trails and open space. If you haven't done it and you still want to do it and run home after this meeting, comments are due today. Thank you to those who already gave us comments. Next week, the determination of non-significance will be issued. And then to follow is the rest of the engagement on parks, trails, and open space. So there'll be an open house at the end of September, September 25th. As a reminder, that is the same day as Snoqualmie Valley Government, Government Association, which we are hosting here. Or no, we're hosting at the school district. The open house will be here, so there is a conflict that night, two things going on that night. And you'll get more on the SVGA meeting here, hopefully by the end of the week, but Duval hosts every September for that meeting. And then the public hearing, the first public hearing will be 10/9. 10/3, planning commission recommendations to city council. The second public hearing at city council is scheduled for the 5th. And then I'm hoping to have a decision on parks, trails, and open space by early November. Next slide. And similar slide on the overall comprehensive plan update. So the housing element, similarly, comments were due today. The land use element comments were provided to the consultant last week. Thank you to those who participated in that. The land use capacity memo, which is slightly different. Those are due to the consultant next week. That is the memo that defines how much of which type we have to build according to state and county guidelines.
It was this week.
Oh, was it this week? Oh, okay. Oh, last week. Land use element went last week. Land use capacity memo goes this week. Next week, you'll see that in the city council packet. The economic development element is almost done. I talked to Director Thomas about that today. We're hoping that that will be in front of city council on the 10/1 meeting. And then the estimated housing land and land use elements will be submitted to King County for review and comment in October. And then the estimated submittal date for PSRC, the transportation plan and element is tentatively scheduled for end of October, early November. And then Director Thomas just added the challenge with the land use capacity memo, which is it covers two things. It covers the job and housing fit and type. We lack capacity for the state designated affordable housing units within city limits. We also are struggling to meet the King County job targets as allocated in 2021. So more to come on those, on the land use, transportation, economic elements coming soon, but busy fall. Next slide. And then just a couple other items. The Planning Commission did a tour of recent projects. So they toured Redemption Church, Rio Vista, Skylet Ridge, and the Ridge at Big Rock. So that was last week. I talked to Director Thomas and she said it was a really fun meeting, walking meeting with a lot of good questions and content. Our emergency management coordinator and Director Thomas attended the first community wildlife protection plan meeting. We will be getting soon. It will be sent to council probably in the next at the next meeting or October 1st meeting. A new ILA with the Eastside Fire and Rescue will come to City Council this fall. We are expecting to see a fee increase. So it'll be a fee increase for folks that apply for special event permits that require fire review. Fee for the city for any fire inspections, as well as for community members and businesses who need fire inspection services. It will change from Woodinville to Eastside Fire. So just anticipating that to cover the difference in wages between Eastside Fire and Woodinville, we're going to see some increases. And then the Snoqualmie Watershed Forum ILA will also come to City Council this fall. It needs to be updated. We don't expect a ton of changes on that. It should be pretty close to what we have now. Next slide. And then just a couple other updates. So the call for artists for Duval Market will be sent out this week to Mount Si High School and Cedar Crest High School. So if you know of anybody muralists who want to do the wall at the Duval Market, please let me know. Or look at the call for artists and send it to them. I'll send it all to you all as well. And you can also let me know so I can get the call for artists out to them. We're hoping to aim for high school students. So traditionally this project It's been done by students. We would like high school age students. We're not requiring that they attend either of those schools, but they're within that boundary. We are selecting a finalist for the First and Virginia mural this week. We had amazing proposals. We have 5 proposals and they are beautiful. If one of them comes to fruition, there's a couple that were just really fantastic. So we're gonna have that selection this week. And then we'll then back engineer the timeline for that project and pick a date for the community to come help paint that wall together and close down the street and make it a celebration. I finished last week, the interviews for the top 3 candidates for our lobbyists and government affairs services. We're hoping to select and have that contract in the packet for next meeting. We will begin interviews for the City Hall front desk administrative assistant this month, and then finally, all of us are occupied for the next several weeks on the budget. And that's it for the city administrator update. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions? Councilman Ackland?
I have a question I forgot to ask, but in order, can I bring something up?
Yeah, sure, we have to do that this time.
It's just really quick. When Tori was mentioning about permits and how long before they expire, I noticed that the property, it looked like the property that the farm brewery is on, that there's a for sale sign there. And so I was just wondering if we had any update. Has that project been abandoned?
It has. Yeah, I'm going to reach out, Director Thomas is gonna connect me to the landowner just to talk through, any do-betters that we could have had, but it ended up being, from what I understand, prohibitively expensive for him to do that project. He had consultants working with him who might not have provided him the kind of information he needed to know how to do a project of that scale and scope in Washington State.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Right, other questions? All right, so I think with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn at 6:51 and come back at 7 for the council meeting. Thank you.
John, are we still?
I'll call to order the city council meeting at 7:01 p.m. And first up, the flag salute. If you could all please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the States of America, to the republic for which it stands, nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clerk, could you please take the roll?
Of course. Mayor Oaklander. Mayor Pro Tem McHenry.
Here.
Mr. Isaacson.
Here.
Mr. Schaefer. Mr. Mercer.
Here.
Mr. Supple.
Here.
Ms. Nackland.
Here.
Ms. Kufelt.
Here.
All right, so we have a quorum. Under absences, just want to call out the mayor being absent due to illness. Councilmember Schaefer has stepped away. His things are here, so I don't know. We'll just note when he comes back. All right, anything under additions and corrections to the agenda? Councilmember Nackland?
I don't know, if I sent an email about it, I don't know if it needs to be corrected or not, but I noticed in the meeting minutes that, instead of, horticulture grant, it had stated there was a horticulture grant. So I don't know, it was mentioned a couple times, so I don't know if we need to hear that in the minutes.
Is that considered like one of the simple errors that can just be corrected even with adoption? Yeah, okay, all right, thank you. Any corrections or additions to the agenda tonight? All right, would someone like to make a motion to adopt the agenda?
Move to adopt the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say no. All right, the agenda is adopted. Next up, we have proclamations, and our clerk is going to read the first one, Hispanic Heritage Month.
Whereas Hispanic Heritage Month, celebrated from September 15th to October 15th, honors the rich cultural contributions, history, and resilience of Hispanic and Latino communities across the United States. And whereas this month marks the independence anniversaries of several Latin American countries, including Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Mexico, and Chile, symbolizing a collective spirit of liberation and self-determination. And whereas Hispanic and Latin Americans have made significant impacts in every facet of our society, from arts and culture to science, education, business, and public service, embodying the values of innovation, hard work, perseverance, and whereas it is crucial to acknowledge and address the systematic barriers and inequities faced by Hispanic and Latino communities, including disparities in education, healthcare, housing, and economic opportunities. And whereas celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month provides an opportunity to foster greater understanding, inclusion, and respect for the diverse backgrounds and experiences that enrich our nation. And whereas we recognize that the essential contributions of Hispanics and Latinos in the fight for civil rights and social justice, advocating for a more equitable and inclusive society for all. And whereas it is vital to support Hispanic and Latino businesses, arts, educators, and leaders, promoting policies that uplift and empower these communities. And whereas we celebrate the vibrant traditions, languages, and cultures that Hispanic and Latino communities bring to our shared American tapestry, reminding us of the beauty and strength found in diversity. Now, therefore, I, Amy Oaklander, Mayor of the City of Duval, hereby proclaim September 15th to October 15th, 2024 as Hispanic Heritage Month. In the City of Duval, I encourage all residents to celebrate the histories, cultures, and contributions of Hispanic and Latin American people, and to work towards a future where equality, justice, opportunity are accessible to everyone. Signed by Amy Mayor.
Considerando que el mes de la herencia hispana se celebra del 15 de septiembre al 15 de octubre de cada año, rinde homenaje a las enormes contribuciones culturales, la historia y la resiliencia de las comunidades hispanas y latinas en todos los Estados Unidos. Y considerando que en este mes se conmemoran los aniversarios de independencia de varios países latinoamericanos, países como Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, México y Chile, lo que simboliza un espíritu colectivo de liberación y autodeterminación, y considerando que los hispanos y latinoamericanos han tenido un impacto significativo en todas las facetas de nuestra sociedad, tanto en las artes y la cultura como en la ciencia, la educación, el comercio y el servicio público, personificando los valores de la innovación, el trabajo duro y la perseverancia, y considerando que es decisivo reconocer y abordar las barreras y desigualdades sistemáticas que enfrentan las comunidades hispanas y latinas, incluidas las disparidades en educación, atención médica, vivienda y oportunidades económicas, y considerando que reconocemos las contribuciones esenciales de los hispanos y latinos en la lucha por los derechos civiles, la justicia social, abogando por una sociedad más equitativa e inclusiva para todos, y considerando que es importante apoyar empresas, artistas, educadores y líderes hispanos y latinos, promoviendo proyectos de ley que eleven y fortalezcan estas comunidades, y considerando que celebramos las vibrantes tradiciones, idiomas y culturas de las comunidades hispanas y latinas, aportan a nuestro pluriculturalismo, recordándonos de la belleza y la fuerza que encontramos en la diversidad, y considerando que el celebrar el mes de la herencia hispana brinda una oportunidad para fomentar una mayor comprensión, inclusión y respeto por los diversos orígenes y experiencias que enriquecen nuestra nación, en virtud de lo cual yo, Amy Okerlander, alcaldesa de la ciudad de Duval, por la presente proclamo del 15 de septiembre al 15 de octubre como el mes de la herencia hispana en la ciudad de Duval, impulso a todos los residentes a celebrar las historias, culturas y contribuciones de los hispanos y latinoamericanos que residen en nuestra hermosa ciudad y en todo el valle del río Snoqualmie, y les invito a trabajar por un futuro donde la igualdad, la justicia y las oportunidades sean accesibles para todos. Firmado por la alcaldesa.
Thank you. I'll read the next one for National Suicide Prevention Week. Whereas suicide is a leading cause of death in the United States, claiming the lives of nearly 50,000 Americans each year and affecting countless families, friends, and communities across the nation. Whereas it's crucial to remember that suicide is preventable, and it is our collective responsibility to promote mental health awareness, reduce stigma, and provide support to those in need. Whereas National Suicide Prevention Month, observed each September, is a time to raise awareness about the importance of mental health care, educate the public on the warning signs of suicide, and encourage those struggling to seek help. Whereas individuals, organizations, and communities across the country are committed to preventing suicide through research and advocacy, and by providing resources and support for those at risk. It is the collective responsibility of our community to look out for each other, support those who are struggling, and ensure that everyone has access to the help they need. Whereas we must work together to ensure that everyone, regardless of race, gender, age, sexual orientation, or socioeconomic status, has access to the mental health care they need. Now, therefore, Amy Okerlander, Mayor of the City of Duval, do hereby proclaim September 2024 as National Suicide Prevention Month. In the City of Duval, I call upon all residents to join in this observance by increasing awareness, supporting those in need, and taking action to prevent suicide in our communities. This could be through participating in local mental health awareness events, reaching out to those who may be struggling, or educating yourself and others about the warning signs of suicide. Let us stand together in solidarity to save lives and promote mental health and well-being for all. Amy Okerlander, Mayor. All right, next we have comments from the audience. During the designated public commentary period within City Council meetings, individuals are allotted a 3-minute speaking duration, while representatives of organizations may address the council for up to 5 minutes. Before presenting, kindly disclose your full name and city residence. It is strongly advised by the city to submit verbal comments in written form to expedite subsequent correspondence. Written comments must be received by the city clerk's office by noon on the meeting day. Addressed to P.O. Box 1300 Duval 98019, or deposited at the City Hall drop box. Please be aware that the City Council, its boards, and its commissions solely entertain public comments from attendees present at the meeting in person. The council does not accept handouts or printed material during public commentary sessions. Information intended for the mayor or the city council shall be directed to the city clerk, who will disseminate it following the submitter's instructions. Upon receipt, the city clerk will receive written public comments and subsequently furnish them to the city council or the relevant board or commission. However, it's important to note that written comments will not be orally presented during the council or applicable board or commission meetings. Any written comments received after the noon deadline for written comments will be shared with the council at the next council meeting as a part of the city clerk's report. Do we have anyone signed up to speak? Go ahead and approach the podium.
Hi. My ears are burning a little bit tonight because I'm Becky Wilson, resident of Duval, also resident of the Ridge Big Rock community and the president of our HOA board. My neighborhood is facing an issue that affects all of Duval, but I'm speaking specifically for my neighborhood today. We have at least 7 homes that have been typed affordable housing by King County and were sold to low-income families as part of the ARCH program, ARCH program. These families receive purchase assistance from ARCH, and the annual value of their home, the increase is capped at how much it can increase each year. These families have integrated seamlessly into our neighborhood and Duval, and I didn't even know that our neighborhood had ARCH housing until a personal friend of mine revealed that she was one of the families in this type of housing in our neighborhood. These families are at great risk because of rising COA and HOA monthly assessment costs, sometimes called dues. These costs are separate from their mortgage payments. The ARCH program offers only purchase assistance, and it doesn't offer any support after purchase to ensure that these families can stay should monthly assessments rise or special assessments come up. I'm here today to ask the city council to consider in their budgeting process a subsidy that can help low-income families in Duval, not just at the Ridge of Big Rock, with housing costs beyond their mortgage payments. A fund that could help these families with financial assistance for rising monthly assessments and special assessments, both of which are guaranteed to come up in owning a home in a COA or an HOA throughout their lifetime. Without this financial assistance, these families will be forced to sell their homes, some of them as soon as 2025, and they've only owned for a few years. Without this financial assistance, they will not make windfall profits if they sell because of the artificial value that has been capped. They can only sell to other families within the ARCH program. Without this assistance, the question is how long will then the new families who move into those homes be able to stay in Duval? How long will the families after them? Without this financial assistance, we're dooming these low-income families to continue cycling through homes until the value of the home has finally increased so much that no family that qualifies for housing in the ARCH program could possibly afford the mortgage payments, let alone the COA dues and the HOA dues. And without this financial assistance, we're putting a ticking clock on the time that this affordable housing is affordable. These families are a critical part of the fabric of Duval, and we need to protect their presence in our community. Duval is such a beautifully unique community, and even low-income families help make Duval strong. This is why we absolutely need to help them remain members of our community. I have a one sheet with some questions that you may have and some facts on our neighborhood, cost of these homes, HOA dues. I will leave that with the clerk in case anyone has any further questions. And this also has my contact information on it. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions. The Ridge of Big Rock really wants to keep these families in their homes. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing anyone else present, so with that, we'll go ahead and close our public comment period. Next up, do we have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say no. Okay, consent agenda passes. Under scheduled items, we will skip the mayor's report as she is absent. We covered the city administrator's report in the committee of the whole. So that leads us to council committees or ad hoc committee reports. Do any council members have any reports to give? Okay, so with that, our only item of business and no action will be taken after that, this item is a closed session under RCW 42.30.140, sub 4A. And is there a time estimate, do you think? 10 minutes. Okay, we're estimating 10 minutes. And then for those council members who are virtual, there should be a Teams link in your email from the clerk.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah. You probably were thinking the same.
Hello, Councilmember Kufeld. Hello. Can you hear okay? I can. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. Turn the video off so you don't look at the top of my head. It's so cute. Okay. It all. Oh. Oh, Councilmember Kufeld, will you sign off on the Zoom meeting? Oh, did I not do that? Okay, 1 second. How do I get rid of that? Hang on, leave webinar.
council will return to, from closed session at 19:37.
Council will return from closed session at 7:42 PM. Council will return from closed session at 7:47 PM.
You good to go? All right, we're back from closed session. We have no other business, so unless there are objections, we'll adjourn at 7:48. Thank you.